disaster recovery is something that most businesses, have a tendency to just say that they've got it in place. The problem with that is if you don't test it, at least in some form or some fashion, then you really don't know if you've got a true disaster recovery plan. The disaster recovery plan that includes, testing of actual contact of vendors, and to ensure that you can get hardware in a timely manner, to, to test that there's actual data on media such as tapes or particular disk drives. Oftentimes we see where somebody's gone in, tried to recover data from a tape, and the tape would be blank. So it's critical that that companies and entities ensure that they have proper disaster recovery. Change and patch management are actually what you're looking for in your operating systems and in your applications to ensure that you've got proper or got the latest version and actually are operating it, optimally. One of the things that's an issue is we tend to ignore our change management process, especially even at the user level. For example, most folks will ignore the little yellow shield in their lower right-hand corner that says you've got updates to install. But improper change and patch management is the number one way for a bad guy to actually enter a system. So change and patch management is important, especially even at the user level, because that's the person or persons that are receiving the emails with the bad software on it. It's the person or persons that are clicking on the buttons that probably shouldn't be clicked on in an email. And so that results in some sort of an exploit. They are always against an unpatched system.
And then there's change management, which involves a couple different things. One of them is applicable if the company writes its own programming software, writes its own code. That particular process is just a high-risk process, period. Inherently, it's just high risk. And companies need some good controls around processing that code, developing that code, creating that code, and especially testing that code to make sure they don't have some errors in the data processing and so forth. There's a lot of things that could go wrong when the program code's written. And that can lead to, again, numerous mistakes and so forth. We have a client that we'd worked with that they didn't have good processes over that, and they ended up being a multi-million-dollar problem as a result of it because they didn't have good testing processes in place and so forth. So it is an at-risk thing that needs to be looked at. For the companies that don't have program development and application development, they buy commercial off-the-shelf software such as Peachtree, Dynamics, QuickBooks. There still is the fact that they're buying software and hardware and put it into place and making changes, and there are upgrades in software that come along, et cetera, et cetera. So there still needs to be a reliable process and all that. And it goes back to vendor management for one thing. For example, if you're going to buy commercial off-the-shelf software, you don't buy it from Ma and Paul's version 1.0. And so we like to suggest some good processes and procedures for that to make sure that turns out to be effective.
So we have things that we call a 0 day. And a 0 day is kind of interesting because it's the time frame. It's actually a little bit of a misnomer. But it's a time frame of when there's an exploit released into the wild, if you will, and an actual patch that's released. So a 0 day actually could range from 1 day to a month. But the critical thing is that once those patches are released, to get them installed so that the systems are not quite as compromisable as they normally would be without that.